I am Becky Smith. I'm the Regional Director for RIBA West Midlands and part of our Climate Net Zero group here at the RIBA as well. And we are joined here today to talk about the 2030 Climate Challenge, the benefits. And this is aimed at chartered practices and non-chartered practices that might be thinking about becoming a chartered practice in the future. We are here today just for a 45-minute session to give you all of the new different changes that have happened. We've relaunched the Climate Challenge recently, and we've got Tait here from the RIBA to give us a brief presentation on the Climate Challenge as a whole and those recent changes that have happened. And then we are delighted to be joined by Hutton from Bryan as well. He's going to tell us a bit about how those changes and they've implemented those within his practice and how everybody could take those changes into their practice and their jobs as well. So if we could just, before we start, everybody turn themselves onto mute. And if you're not Alex or Matt, if you could just turn your camera off as well until we get to the questions part, just while we're doing the presentations. And then I will hand over to Alex for our first presentation.
Thanks, Becky. I'm just going to share my screen. So welcome, everybody. This is our short update on the 2030 Climate Challenge, the second version as released last week. The reason why we're doing this, as I'm sure you're all very familiar, is the global rise in CO2 emissions that has been going on since the turn of the century and before, and previous century, I should say. And though there may have been a small dip last year, which isn't shown on this graphic because it's not all confirmed yet, it's most likely back to where it would have been anyway in 2021. The construction industry and buildings, the built environment is worth about 35 to 40% of CO2 emissions globally. About 25 from buildings, the use of buildings, and 10% from the construction process. And our planet can only absorb about half of what we currently produce overall across the planet. So we've got a significant amount of work to do. That is the basis of our piece of work. In June 2019, we joined the Declaration of a Climate and Biodiversity Emergency. And we confirmed support of the Theresa May's pretty much last effort as our Prime Minister, as committing us to net zero by 2050. Our work is all underpinned at the moment by the UN Sustainable Development Goals. We're a signatory of the UN Global Compact, so we have to place these at the heart of our business and everything we do. And that is no different for the guides we produce for our members. So we fairly quickly identified the core sustainable outcomes that all buildings contribute to. And though they may be quite wide and global in nature, we've slightly amended them to better meet the needs of the construction industry. And this has resulted in our sustainable outcomes and our sustainable outcomes guide, which was published towards the end of 2019. Each of those outcomes has a kind of a core or a couple of core metrics associated with it, and we've identified all the different industry standards and guides that you can follow to better implement those into practice. So that's the kind of the basis of our sustainable outcomes work, and that all fits into setting the processes that you should all be pretty familiar with through the plan of work. Each of those outcomes and our process for performance evaluation and feedback, the plan for use guide, all creating a solid structure. So, what we tend to produce is process management, design management guidance, and we've just completed that suite with the plan for use guide a couple of months ago, all to help with those for the 2030 challenge and our wider sustainable outcomes. So let's go to the targets themselves. We identified just after that declaration in 2019 the core areas that we are of most interest in, most critical for the climate change, those being operational energy, embodied carbon, water use, and then the making sure that we're aware of the unintended consequences of buildings that we design for the health and well-being of occupants. So part of the reasoning for this is around our inability to meet what we intend to as a wider industry, partly because of a ridiculous regulatory system that doesn't prioritize actual performance, but looks at a not very accurate modelling. This is a piece of work done by the Better Buildings Partnership, which is a collection of the largest commercial developers. Along the bottom, you've got groupings of EPC ratings, and each of those grey lines is the actual energy performance of an individual building. And what this shows is these triangles show there is absolutely no correlation whatsoever between the regulatory process and real life. So that has to change, and we can do better if we have the resources to implement more effective modelling processes, like following TM54 for offices, or Passive House. We swap that out for Passive House. We can get a lot more close to actual. In fact, actually, in some cases, we can be very, very accurate. So it's possible. It's just more resource intensive in the early stages of design projects. So we've also been working more closely this year and towards the end of last year with Letty and the Whole Life Carbon Network on more effective, realistic and manageable targets based on much more accurate modelling than we had available to us in 2019. So the embodied carbon world has grown significantly just in the past couple of years. And where we didn't have access to useful data, we now do. Lots more people undertaking modelling and willing to share a bit of it. So we're starting to build a better picture of what good looks like and what is achievable. So that's our core reasoning for a version 2. And we have set slightly amended targets for operational energy for 2025, but kept our 2030 targets, and new targets that are much more achievable for embodied carbon based on the modelling. And it's worth pointing out that these will be just for what is achievable with a stretch, rather than what is absolutely necessary based on science-based targets. We will be doing that piece of work next, working with UK GBC, who are due to conclude their science-based target setting programme by COP26 in November. So hopefully early next year we'll have another version of this with not just what is achievable, but what is actually absolutely necessary. So we've got targets for commercial development for offices. This is new build or major refurbishment. We have targets for schools. So this is a new set that we didn't have before. And we have targets for domestic and residential. This is quite wide because, of course, this could cover an individual house to a huge scheme. So each of these needs to be taken with a little bit of a pinch of salt. But our 2030 targets are still what we should all be aiming for in general, even if it's a tougher for the smallest and the largest. It's worth pointing out that there's a slight difference between this and the previous version, in that we used to have a 2020 target, which we no longer have because we're in 2021. But we do have a current best practice. So this is based on recent buildings and working with partners across the industry to identify what good can look like right now. So buildings that have just been completed. Or perhaps completed within the past year. These are the kind of figures that we think generally work. But these are not targets. This is just for right now. And it's likely that we'll try and keep doing this each time we look at the targets, which we're probably going to have to do every year. We also have some more requirements, not targets, but more like requirements for some key health areas that can follow BRIAM or CIBSE guidance, or just our approved documents. So we have, it's mainly just to point out that there are some pretty core unintended consequences, particularly around overheating when we try to maximize daylighting and indoor air quality, along with making sure that we're really airtight. We can cause some problems. So we're just trying to make sure people are aware of these issues. We slightly reset our trajectories. I mean, we're still saying that it's important to aim for 2030 targets now.
Hello there, how you doing?
And that, you know, for the buildings that the people are designing right now, they should at least be aiming for 2025, because it might take a few years to get there. And if we carry on with what we've set as business as usual, that will not at all meet our general aims for limiting climate change to no more than 1.5 degrees by the end of the century. So the other key change is around the language, actually. We want to make sure that this is really clear, that this is about an attempt to meet the targets. This is not an outright commitment to meet them. And we have found some people being less interested or being more wary of this and signing up because they felt that we were going to try and pin everything on them. And of course, this is for a whole team to address, not just for architects. We are going to be interested in collecting data. That's the next push that we're going to be undertaking. So the predicted energy use, both regulated, unregulated, and if possible, any renewables. Then the core outcomes themselves, the operational energy and possible water and embodied carbon. We're doing this because we want to be able to identify trends. We want to work with others to do that. We want to be able to see what the opportunities are. We want to look at that by sectors, by project size. And we want to undertake research with the rest of the construction industry to make sure we're targeting the right areas. And it'll help inform work that we need to do. We also recognise that gathering data is not that straightforward, and that operational energy is not, for instance, operational energy is not in your gift to provide. It isn't your data, it's your clients'. So we recognise that sometimes that won't be available to you. We hope that it will, and we're providing some guidance on how to help that process. But we can't just expect it as if it's not yours to give. Likewise for whole life carbon assessments, though they're becoming easier to do, they're still complicated and they require resourcing. So a client needs to pay for them, really, and we'd like to see that become more and more of a standard process. But we recognise that right now it perhaps isn't. So if you don't have that data, we're not going to expect you to go and do that assessment for your complete project just to give us data, because the main reason for undertaking this is to make better design decisions as early as possible. So that would just be a waste of your effort, though the data would be nice to have. It's just we don't want to push for things that are unnecessary. We have, as I mentioned, we have guidance on talking to clients about the climate challenge. So guidance for architects, guidance for clients, and then template letters of ways to talk to them, and hopefully a way for them to talk back. So both committing to what you're going to attempt to do, but again, it's all about that attempt and not an outright commitment. And that's it from me. You can find out more online, and I think my colleagues have been sharing links to the various guidance and pieces. So I'll hand over to Becky.
Thanks, Alex. Yes, and Catherine's put lots of links in the chat as well for anybody to access, and we will pop the links as well in the feedback form that comes out afterwards. So if there's anybody that hasn't got access to the chat or has got a problem with that at the moment, they will come out afterwards through the Eventbrite email address as well. Thanks, Alex. That was great and really, really informative. And those new guides and things for clients, I think, you know, we've had a question in the chat about how to speak to domestic clients and nudge them in the right direction about getting more than the minimum of building regs, so that hopefully those guides as well that you get now from signing up will help that conversation. You know, please reach out to any of us at the RIBA if you want any help in doing that as well. We're more than welcome. Happy. I'm going to hand over to Matt now to talk about how he's actually implementing that in practice, because you know, we're all here and in practice, and you know, how are we doing it? How are we going to do it? So Matt, if you'd like to share your screen, and then we'll do a short Q&A afterwards. So if anybody has got any questions, there's a few flowing through, please let us know, and then we'll put it to Matt and Alex afterwards.
Thanks, Becky, and thanks, Alex, for that. I hope you can hear me okay and you can see the screen.
Yeah, it's all good,
yeah,
thanks.
Great stuff. Okay, so thanks for the introduction. My name's Matt Hutton. I'm an architect and director in the North region for Bryan. I look after our Sheffield and Birmingham offices. I work nationally across all the sectors, and my role, I guess, is to lead our teams in the North, but a key part of my role on the board is around our culture, communication, and more recently, sustainability, as it's absolutely intrinsically linked to everything that we are attempting to do. So a bit about the presentation. I'll give a bit of an overview of Bryan and our current kind of design ethos, talk about our journey from signing up to RIBA 2030, and then moving into how we've approached the kind of various elements of the RIBA challenge, and hopefully finally ending with next steps and tell you what we're attempting to implement and how we're tackling it in the future. This is Bryan, our team. We've got 4 offices across the UK, with about 130 staff. We're now up to 48th, I believe, in the largest practice in the AJ 100. We work, as I said, in pretty much all sectors. However, we do specialise in education, residential, and more recently MMC. So I guess our purpose, we see our role at Bryan as one of assisting and enabling transformation and change. So we want really every project to be more successful and more sustainable than the last, in whatever way that success is measured, whether that's socially, environmentally, or economically. It's about trying to improve the world for the better, and we call this our more than design. So what we do, obviously, hopefully, is design beautiful buildings and spaces. However, beyond that, we do much more than just design. And I think our digital team are heavily involved now in data management. It's becoming increasingly more important for our clients. Alex mentioned earlier about data collection. It's such an important part of the process now. So our team there can help you define and manage data. We perform information management role for contractors and other architects. And we're always advocating a very kind of open BIM process for better information management. We now have landscape integrated into our design process in-house, because we think that allows us to respond quite quickly and efficiently to our clients' needs. We have a Bryan Living brand, which is our really residential design and delivery team. And they work in tandem with our strategic development team, finding and facilitating land development opportunities. And then finally, our strategic team, who work with our clients at what we tend to call RIBA stage -1, I guess is the area we focused our initial efforts on change in education in terms of the RIBA challenge in-house. So we use this, I think it's one of the RIBA guides, that kind of explains to our team where we are on this journey. And I'd certainly say we're between these 2 milestones at the moment. So understanding the impact of what we do and starting to measure our own office impacts and project impacts, and also getting our house in order. And it's no simple task even to get to this stage. There's a lot of work to be done. Our process, I guess, really began after we were kind of fortunate enough to win the RIBA Sustainability Award for our BREEAM Excellent National College for High Speed Rail in 2018. And it was something that our client and the contractor team from Wilmot Dixon were extremely engaged with us from the outset. So we learned a lot of lessons actually whilst doing that project and working on it. But we began to understand that some of those key decisions on the project that probably should have been made or could have been made to improve the end result, unfortunately, had already passed. And to be honest, with hindsight, I think if we'd have been driving that process and that discussion rather than reacting, we believe we could have dramatically improved the final outcome from either an embodied or operational carbon perspective. Around that time, RIBA launched the 2030 challenge, and then we also signed up to Architects Declare. And it all kind of culminated in an implementation of what we call our circular thinking group now. And that was about us as a practice understanding where we are, whether that be individually, internally, or on the projects we design in terms of our carbon impact, whole life, embodied, what have you. And we started to look at kind of 3 phases of work with our clients. So the engagement phase, where we hold vision workshops and we ask clients particular questions. We wanted to start to agree more sustainable aspirations with them at the outset. The evolve section in the middle, which we're collaborating with consultants and contractors and sometimes other architects, how we kind of drive some of the sustainability agenda into that. And at the end of that, the evaluate process, where we're starting to measure and monitor what those things we've put in place through post-occupancy evaluations and project reviews and audits. So that kind of created what we now call our circular thinking group. And phase one of getting together with that group was us all really honestly looking at each other and saying, we don't know enough about this. You know, there's a lot of research and development to be done here. So as a team, we took away various sections of the R&D process. We undertook a full review of most of the external documents. We analysed some of the questions that RIBA are asking us in terms of the sustainability outcomes when we were submitting for awards. And then we reviewed our current processes and looked at a proposed action plan to improve that in the future. We started to set ourselves targets that were aligned to the 2030 challenge as a minimum, and then we had to then align those with our QA processes internally, which is quite difficult. Alongside that, we then started to think about external training and R&D and setting a budget for that. So beyond that, we focused our attention on targeting projects that would really support our development as a practice and in the sense of our sustainability aspirations. So we went out and targeted some strategic projects. We do a lot of work for the Department of Education, and we've now completed work in terms of the Gen Zero project through our digital team. We looked at the Spec 21, which was about embedding sustainability in the digitalisation of the school's output spec. We picked up and aiming for things like Net Zero Schools projects, and we're also working on the Centre for Advanced Timber Technology. So all these things are helping us learn about some of these processes along the way. So our current position, I guess, we looked at it as a sort of three-phase approach. I think we're really getting towards the end of phase one at the moment, which we call kind of learning and planning. And that's been a lot of R&D, setting up that strategic project and getting the right people around the table to engage. And lots, to be honest, lots of talking, lots of meetings, lots of kind of seminars and feeding back to that group. Phase two, which we'll come on to next, is about testing and engagement. So that's trialling the approach that we've created on some of our current projects. It's about reducing our own office operational carbon and what we can do individually in the practice, and then widening that involvement to all of our staff. And then phase three for us is about implementation and refinement. So implementing this across all the projects that we do as standard, trying to really improve our products and processes and embedding it into the culture of what we do. So we call this now circular thinking. It was born out of an engagement tool we used, which we still use with our education clients, called Smarter Thinking Spaces. And that was really about creating a platform outside of building design and architecture, but to ask the right questions at the right time to the right people. Now we've adapted this to include the kind of learning and research we've done through working with the RIBA Challenge and our own sustainability targets as a business. So we've set our questions and our processes around three key priorities: people, place, and process. And these priorities don't just define how we design now or how we structure and manage our projects. They're the thread that connects how we think and how we act about everything we do, really, so including the way we operate as an organisation. So we now are going to use this process moving forward. We've started this on some projects already. So the first part of that is the engagement process. So this is the vision workshops where we engage with the clients to help them define the brief and capture their aspirations for the project in each of those three core principles. The next phase of that is what we call evolve, and this is during this phase we're measuring how the design is evolving. We're aligning it with the objectives we set with the client at the engage stage, and then we're kind of particularly focusing here on evidence and data collection, which would then be revisited at each RIBA stage to ensure that we're achieving the KPIs we set ourselves. Then we move on to the evaluate stage. This is at the completion of the work with the client and the project teams. It's about evaluating our designs and the building, see how the outcome compare to the reality of what we set initially. And again, it'd be sort of data driven, but also a bit of human insight to critically reflect on what went well in the project and what could have been improved. And then finally, we're calling this the enhance phase. So this is about closing the loop. It's about capturing that feedback throughout the process, make sure those outcomes start to embed into the culture and the next building project that we work on. So make sure we improve each and every time we do it. So I guess it's kind of our constant desire to engage, evolve, evaluate, and then enhance within each project and at each stage from one job to the next, which is hopefully going to create a cycle of improvement that is going to underpin all the projects that we do. That's where we've kind of coined this idea of a circular thinking project. So I mentioned we were towards the end of phase one at the moment. And in terms of easy wins, initially we've created a kind of simple design principles document from the circular thinking group that will be sent around the offices and used in more targeted design reviews across the offices, across all 4 offices. That's the start of the engagement process with the rest of our staff. Now, beyond that, there's very simple, practical things we've done as well. Some, quite daft, like 100% recycled toilet roll going from top to bottom, literally. But the idea of, reducing travel in lieu of video conferencing has made a big difference. Obviously, post-pandemic world, that's helped. We've switched all of our pool cars to hybrid cars, and we're aiming to go to electric next. We're moving offices very soon. In the Sheffield office, you can see I'm in the church at the moment, so that's going to be a huge energy saving potential. Reducing printing, using digital tools more for markups. We've now switched to a zero carbon energy supplier, which has really brought things down. And we're aiming to do a minimum of a quarter of our CPDs to provide an element of sustainable design. And actually that's probably increased beyond where we set that initial target. We're moving into phase 2, which is, I guess, where we are now. Our plan is really around testing and engagement, so looking at current projects and engaging with our staff. So the information and the work we've done in the Circular Thinking Group is going to get out there, and we're going to engage with all of the staff, embed that into our ethos and culture, and educate people internally. So that will be through kind of increased talks, seminars, hub articles, CPDs throughout the business, and like I said, targeted design and sustainability reviews. And a big part of our next phase 2 is about testing. So we're going to look at 3 projects initially in completely different sectors, working with the wider design team to really evaluate and understand some of the obviously lessons learned, but also some of the decisions we made early on, how we could have changed them and what could have improved. And then at the same time, we're going to look at 3 other projects that have recently completed, do our revised post-occupancy evaluation process, which has been developed throughout the Circular Thinking team's development too, take the lessons learned from that and hopefully feed that into the next projects. And then I guess the next steps beyond the testing and engagement process for us is about responding to the metrics that Alex touched on earlier, actually, that we need to analyse as a practice. We've been reviewing the RIBA 2030 checklist. We'll be reviewing the new one that I've just seen Alex put up earlier, and trying to cross-check that against kind of the RIBA Sustainable Outcomes Guide as well. There are a number of metrics we need to evaluate ourselves against. And what we've done, I just noticed on Alex's slides, actually, I think he's got 8 subheadings and we've got 6, so we might need to review that. But yeah, we've picked out 6 subheadings of net operational carbon, net zero embodied carbon, water use, biodiversity, indoor health and delivery. So our plan now is to try and tackle all of these subgroups through our circular thinking team. So we're going to set up leaders for each of the key principles, widen the engagement process within the practice to form subgroups, and then they're going to tackle the kind of research, analysis and implementation of our response so that we can achieve our required targets. Excuse me. So like I said, that's the next phase beyond the testing of where we're at. But we have already begun some of this, and we've started to create an action plan for each of these headings. And you can see these spreadsheets here. And the spreadsheets are set up in terms of the principles and the requirements that we need to achieve in the metrics, and then time across the top. So hopefully this is going to help us create a timeline of actions that is going to help us set what we consider to be the KPIs collaboratively within the practice, and then it provides us something to review against, so we can review our progress every month when we meet up to see how we're getting on with each bit. So it's just a way of us breaking down some of the challenges, and you know, there's a lot of things there. So finally, next steps, and for others, I guess, on the call, it is challenging. At the start, it was quite daunting, and we thought it could be extremely time consuming. It's made us rethink our approach, but I don't think that's a bad thing at all. Splitting tasks amongst our teams and across offices has been difficult with COVID and working through teams. But you know, don't be afraid to reach out to consultants and specialists where required. Key things, time, always an issue in I'm sure every architectural practice on this call. That's probably the biggest issue, time and resource. The training part of it is something that we're looking into further now, and I think there will be further work for us to be done there. But I guess the huge positives are the commitment and engagement from our team has been absolutely fantastic throughout, and our clients. And just starting the process and signing up to the RIBA challenge has already changed our approach. And it was great that Alex talked about it's an attempt, not a commitment. I think a lot of our guys were concerned about that early on, and I think everyone needs to take this opportunity to begin the process and see the benefits that it can bring, even in the easy wins in the short term, but hopefully for the long term, for the practice, for architecture generally, and for the planet, as it says here, there's no planet B. So that's a bit of a whistle-stop tour of where we've got to as a practice. We're not there yet. We've still got a lot of work to do. We're not experts yet, but we're on the journey, and we're learning all the time. It's been really good. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Matt, and that was really informative. And we've had some great comments in the chat as well. Adam has said, great insight into the Bryan journey, good to see larger practices forging the path, which is great. And it's actually, we've had a couple of questions about, and Alex has answered a few of them in the chat as well, about how to find the information and where to get that, how to, submit those, your data, but also about small practice and domestic projects, on a small scale. And I don't know whether you've got anything you could offer to maybe some smaller practices, because I know, Matt, when we spoke the other day, you said about not leaving smaller practices behind. And obviously in larger practices, maybe we do have a bit more resource, but how can sole practitioners or smaller practices get on that journey as well, so they can be part of this?
Yeah, I think the change in emphasis that Alex outlined earlier is really important. It is extremely daunting. It is challenging. There's a lot of things to look at. And like I said, the way we're approaching it now is, you can see the length of the process that it's been to get there. But it's more about, if you can get people to engage with it at all and start talking to the clients and educate the clients, then, that's half the battle, really. I think there's a real benefit in smaller practices and domestic practices thinking about sustainable outcomes of the projects that they work on. I think it's even just in a marketing PR capacity, I'm pretty sure practices that will gain something from that. But if you can actually change the way we're delivering things as well, then that's even better.
Definitely. And I think it is sort of setting yourself apart. We always talk about, in practice, what do you do differently to your competitors, and what do you do that and if this is something that you're striving for and you want your clients to strive for, it is something that can set you apart, and something you can strive for as part of your practice as well, which I think is always a great thing. I mean, Alex, I don't know whether you've got any sort of thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, I think, there's been a few comments in the chat about that difference, and we recognise there is a big difference between just on the projects. You've got the practice resources. A larger practice might have the ability to undertake more dedicated work, have staff even like Matt, to be able to look after this kind of area in the organisation. Small practices will just not have that resource, so might be looking to us more and others. So we've been making sure that we can't do this by ourselves. We know that we need to work with everybody else, so we've been working closely with other partners through the Construction Industry Council, which is the big umbrella body for all professional bodies in the construction industry, but also through more targeted guidance with LETI, and hopefully we'll do more with ACAN and others in the future. But that difference is really, really important. And one of the things that we think we need to push for is to try and help our practices on the smaller scale really get a grounding in passive house processes, just because once you've got that, you can't unsee it. So as soon as you've got that mentality, it can never not be there. So that's just the working processes and the maths behind it, really. So that's one of the things that we think we need to be able to push for and help our members get there, because it's a big uphill battle, and it's not getting easier. Everything gets more and more complex. And then on the largest side, you need not just the breadth of all the different things that are going on in the industry, but you need to be able to cover individual expertise too. So I imagine, Matt, when you're sitting in front of clients, they're becoming more and more aware, and that won't be happening at the smaller scale. So it's more down to the practice themselves to help handhold clients. And I think we've got some advice. Perhaps it would be good to have specific guidance from the RIBA on what is the 2030 challenge for small projects. And one of the things we hope to do in the future is on refurbishment and retrofit. There's a massive working group, cross-industry working group, trying to develop guidance on kind of different types of refurbishment and retrofit projects. So kind of splitting it into maybe 3 or 4 different models, and then providing different targets. So actually updating targets for those types of buildings, and more dedicated guidance to try and pick up some of that adapting the existing stock work, which of course we know is a big part of our small practices work. So I think that's going to have to be our focus. We've definitely recognised that, and that we'll have more targeted events, longer than this one. I realise we've only got a few minutes left, so I'll stop and move on. But more for larger practices to talk about the big problems that they're having, and then the same kind of thing for small practices. And then we'll start picking up the detail of operational energy and embodied carbon and water consumption and so on. So I think we've got, we're treating this relaunch as a proper push. So we've been a bit absent in this area for the past few months, and we're keen to make our presence known.
I think what I would add to that as well, Alex, is something I said at the very beginning, is small practices and large practices, you can drive the narrative around this, and I think that's the key part of it. We weren't doing that 5 years ago. We were kind of reacting to things and ticking boxes effectively. But once you kind of harness the power of it, whether it be a big project or not, you can really drive that narrative with your clients. And most people that we've met are very receptive to it.
Yeah. I mean, we know that the 2030 challenge as a concept has been pretty successful. Like, it's pretty widely known, and you've got client bodies, buying into it. We've even seen it appearing in contract documentation, which is actually a bit troubling. But yeah. that's a separate matter for negotiation. But it's getting there, and we don't want this to be too hard and fast. We think it is important to get there. Certainly the operational energy ones, they're critical. We've been trying to do this as an industry for years and years, and it's something that we understand. The average person should have a general awareness of what a kilowatt hour per meter squared per year is, because they're paying energy bills. And that is not the case for embodied carbon. We're new at this. I mean, 20 years ago, it was brand new kind of process thinking. And we've not progressed that much. It's been huge just in the past couple of years. But it's really immature. So our targets are still, they're as good as we can get them, but they're still pretty loose. And the problem we still have is that, different tools that you can use might result in different results if completed by even the same team. And definitely different teams using the same tools often produce different results. Though we're mostly getting the kind of product and material data from the same place, the ICE database. There is work that we need to do as an industry to combine this all into one piece, and we hope to be able to create new databases, better than Carbon Buzz was for operational energy, but for embodied carbon, and work with everybody to do that. But what we've got now is the kind of serious buy-in, and what's really special about embodied carbon and that life cycle analysis is it's for everybody. There's not one professional body that is the body that does that. Everybody, it's everybody's responsibilities, everybody and anybody's responsibilities. So what we want is architects to step up and lead that process, but they're going to need the structural engineers and the building services engineers to help them with that. And that I think has got to be pretty key, and getting that grounding, even just starting with kind of rules of thumb, early decision making, what materials to focus on, what structural processes to follow, and then starting to look at the actual modelling itself. And there's lots of free tools. We have I'll try and put in the chat a link to the roundup of guidance. Yeah. At the bottom of that, there's all the free tools that you can download.
Yeah, I was going to say there's a huge amount of resources out there, and I think part of the challenge we found, and maybe something that RIBA will pick up, is how you put those together and guide people towards the right types of documents. And yeah, there's a lot of things out there. But then, as when we first approached it, we thought we would have to create and develop all of those things ourselves. But lots of practices and, like I say, engineers are already doing it. So it's just knowing which ones to use.
And people are so much more free and open that I've seen. You know, I've been at the RIBA for over 10 years, and this is the best I've seen industry working together.
Yeah.
You know, it's really impressive.
Definitely is. And yeah, the one question that keeps coming up is about how, if we sign up and then we can't achieve it, or we can't, have we then failed? And nobody likes failure. I think we keep trying to reinforce that it's about having a go, and it's making those steps in the right direction.
Yeah.
And I think, Matt, you really reinforced that today about it being a process. But there may be people on this call saying, well, there's no way I can achieve that, or but I don't know whether either of you had anything that you could touch on with that, about, you know, about having a go and making that progress and going in the right direction.
Well, I guess I've just said it out, haven't I, in terms of that. That's how we've done it. You know, it was something that, you know, like I said, but when we won the sustainability award with RIBA, I felt like I was so pleased that we got it, but I also felt like we'd not really driven that conversation, and I knew we could drive it more. So it was a case of harnessing the kind of the good work that we'd done and the things that we'd learned, and then kind of coincidentally, RIBA launches the 2030. We sign up to Architects Declare, and everyone's kind of involved in that now. So that's why I hopefully try and speak honestly about where we're at on our journey. You know, it's very easy to send an email, say, oh, we're net zero now because we've offset, we bought a load of trees, whatever, and that's not the case. You've got to improve your processes from top to bottom. That's how we see it, and that's why it's been the biggest challenge, really, because there's so many things it impacts upon. But like I said, at least starting it, you learn so much about the things that you could improve. You can't always do it straight away, you know, financially or time, whatever. But you know what you need to improve and how to get there. And I think just setting those sorts of targets and setting a plan for the future is so important to do now.
Yeah, we have. I think Alistair is on the call. I did see his name pop up earlier. So we're working with Alistair on a roadmap for practice. So that kind of the key steps to take at the beginning for the business. And I think what's really important is that every business is going to need to do it their way. There may be kind of key steps to take everybody together, but just like, you know, doing quality management properly, you probably do it already. You know, you just haven't documented it. Mm-hmm. You haven't done it as thoroughly as perhaps you might. But the only way to make it stick is if you work it through yourself, rather than just following you can follow the checklist to start, but then you've got to make those decisions yourself and bed it in your way. Otherwise, it's just trying to follow standard guidance rather than what is appropriate to you. Yeah. And though they may look quite similar by practice, it's important to take the steps yourself. I think that if practices don't do it that way, then it might not stick as well.
Agreed, yeah.
And somebody's asked the question, when will the roadmap be available? Do we know that yet?
Good question. We haven't got a date yet. We'll try and get it out in the autumn.
Great.
Hopefully Alistair will say, yeah, that sounds perfectly reasonable.
You gave him a deadline on the call now, so there we go. I think there is, somebody's asked quite a sort of, why is Passive House marked with an EPC rating as E? Because it has a heat pump. It's holding back heat decarbonisation. That's obviously a really direct question in terms of that, but I didn't know whether either of you had anything to offer as a really direct one to finish on before I just sort of...
Yeah, apologies, I can't answer that one at the moment. A bit too specific for my knowledge.
It is quite a specific question, to be quite honest. But Laura, we will take that away, and we will try and get an answer to that for you as well, because yeah, it does seem a bit crazy.
There was one as well about the kind of the resources that I mentioned, and certainly if you go on, I'm pretty sure RIBA have a similar thing, Architects Declare website, there's a number of links there to things that have already been done, calculators and things like that. Field and Clegg Bradley, who obviously just kind of set up and led that Architects Declare thing, have some amazing resources on their website. So that would be a first point of call I would look at if I was anyone thinking about it.
Yeah. Theirs is anyone can use. It's a spreadsheet, and you've got a Hawkins Brown, Revit plugin. Mm-hmm. And there's Mesh Energy have their own. I think we've got links to those in our
any links that you want to send over, Matt and Alex obviously will include all the RIBA ones to pop in the feedback form, external or otherwise, we can pop out to everybody afterwards. as we are now 1 minute over our time, I thought I will wrap things up, and just to let everybody know, there is a huge amount of information coming out from the RIBA about the relaunch of the Climate Challenge at the moment, and the changes to that. There is a briefing session that will be going on to all existing signatories, and if you sign up from the back of today because you think it's a great idea, then an email will come out to you about the information of that briefing session as well, so you're fully informed about it. There will be a series of workshops that we're putting together as well in the autumn, which will help people, and they'll be tailored around each of the different the categories, so you can get some really in-depth knowledge about those different ones and how to do it and where to go, and ask those difficult questions as well. So we will be putting those together for September, and then there is a large practice briefing session that's going to happen as well, so any large practices on the call can get that email that we sent directly to you if you've signed up. So I think that's it, but there is a new Climate Hub page on the RIBA. That information will be updated constantly, so all of the latest information will be there. The link has been put in the chat, but we will send it out separately as well. And finally, massive thank you to Matt and Alex for being here today, for answering the questions and giving us an update on everything that's going on at this really, really important time. Great. So if I say bye to everybody, Matt and Alex, if I
Thanks
just
for listening.
Bye. Yeah, thank you very much.